Well, good morning, everybody. And as always, thanks to the organizers. We just did our big annual meeting, and I know it's quite a challenge to do these big virtual meetings. So thanks for everybody and the chance to speak. I'm going to try to go fairly quickly through these first few slides because I'd really like to get to the more meat of where I'm thinking. The objective of this is really that we do a lot of investment in variety development, and yet even especially I think at USAID and the donor community, we don't see a lot of uptake or clear uptake of varieties in a lot of our partnering countries. And so my intention is that I've been basically speaking with as many people in our network as I can find who really want to talk or have special interest in seed to think through how the seed systems work in different locations and what innovations are out there. So I'm joined by Dave Hoisington, the director of the lab, and Fareed Walier at ICRESAT, retired, but we were involved in a project with Malawi that was kind of the instigation for this, and we'll talk more about Malawi here in a second. So quick presentation outline. I want everybody to know what the Peanut Innovation Lab is and kind of why we're doing this, but just to get to basics, why do seed systems matter? And then, what's peculiar about peanuts? And then I tried to do a bit of a deep dive about our case in Malawi because I think it's pretty exemplary of a lot of the different types of systems that we're seeing. And then roughly like, what have we learned so far, and kind of thinking about next steps. So just very quickly, the Peanut Innovation Lab, you've seen a lot of our graduate students presenting and partners. We are part of the whole of government, the Feed the Future program, to deal with food security. We work with US universities, partnering with overseas research partners to work on many things related to peanuts. There are 10 US host institutions and 2 African institutions. These are our areas of inquiry that were kind of mandated, but you can see variety development is a big piece of what we do. I forgot to say on the previous one too that our target countries are primarily Senegal, Ghana, Uganda, and Malawi. So my sampling for seed systems is a bit biased towards those. So seed systems, it goes somewhat without saying. But we've really got good evidence now that agricultural productivity underpins economic growth and food security, especially in agrarian economies and emerging economies in Africa would be good examples of that. And it kind of goes without saying, but at the same time, we need to think about the details of this. But all farming, whether you're farming 200 or 500 hectares or 1 hectare, it all starts with the seed, both the quality of the seed, whether it's going to germinate, how pure it is, and also the genetic potential of the variety. And without some kind of seed system strategy, farmers are going to keep farming and they're going to take seed from somewhere, but without a seed system strategy, there's really no pipeline to get these genetic gains available to farmers. And on the smaller scale side of things, I'd say that most of the expense of farming really is related to the seed. So it is the critical intervention point. In many of our places where we work, the farmers, part of their attachment to growing groundnuts or peanuts in general is that there are no inputs needed. So seed is really the main thing. And about seed systems too, that really every crop and in every context, they're different. And there's kind of a mix of things going on. But I would say as peanut is the most widely grown legume in the world, fun fact of the day, it is an enigma. There are some serious differences on peanuts relative to other crops. So what are they? And my forgiveness to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, but let me count the ways. When I was doing interviews, I came up with basically 25 very different things about peanuts that separated them from other crops. As a grain legume, seed systems are particularly difficult, at least in terms of commercialization, that they are non-hybrid, self-pollinating, and in most places marginally commercial, a lot of subsistence farming, both peanuts and other grain legumes. It makes it so there's really not a clear business case because farmers are going to save their own seed generally. So they're not going to go back to get new varieties all that often. So without the consistency, it makes that's a serious challenge. With peanuts, though, the multiplication rate is really among the lowest of all, if not the lowest of all grain legumes, and then the seeding rate is the highest. So the combination of those two things, as I kind of say, it's both management intensive and extensive, meaning that you need to work hard to get good yields, but no matter what you do, you're still going to need a lot of percentage of area is just going to seed production just by the nature of it. It makes it really challenging to bulk and multiply seed of new varieties relative to other crops. Peanut, as we know in the peanut world here, is both fragile and bulky, which is a bad combination. You need specialized equipment for shelling, handling, all production aspects. You can't use a regular combine, for example, for peanuts. Everything adds a lot of cost to it. For transport, we want to keep seed in the shell for as long as we can. So you're basically adding, 30% of the weight and doubling the volume of everything. And that adds a lot of cost to transport and storage. As I was kind of saying earlier too, that, globally, we might be in the US where farmers are growing fairly large scale, fully mechanized, very sophisticated, highly capitalized production, but the majority of peanuts are grown by small scale, low input farmers. And, by just that very nature, there's limited market pull because you're so disaggregated across a bunch of different actors, and also that those folks don't have a lot of money to invest in inputs or scaling of new varieties and keeping a system functioning. Also, this is kind of a strange term, but I think peanuts are particularly sticky. Varieties just stick around, and part of that is, once you have a processor or the farming systems become kind of tuned to that variety, people get used to it. The processors, the roasting characteristics, it's even obviously here in the States, if a variety is accepted widely, farmers get used to it, processors like it, and it's hard to kind of push it aside without some major intervention or some kind of disruption. For example, tomato spotted wilt virus, pushed out, flow runner type varieties and brought in eventually, here we are with 06G that's been around for a long time, at least in the runner world. I would say it seems similar in most countries because people just get used to those types. So, having a 10-year lifespan for a variety has implications for the commercialization and paying for breeding programs, for example, as opposed to, say, like cotton or soy, where it's maybe 1 or 2 years. Especially thinking about the countries where we work, there's kind of what I would say incomplete liberalization. There's a lot of the government intervention within the seed systems, but with the liberalization that's happened over the years, moving away towards government, parastatal industries, there's a market failure that there's no stepping up to solve these problems on seed. And I would say it's too that seed systems are political, especially in countries where peanuts are a big deal. The government may be the main producer of certified seed or the main buyer of certified seed and subsidize things in different ways. And I think it would be incorrect not to just point that out. So moving on to my quick case study here. In Malawi, for those who don't know, Malawi's a small country in Southern Africa. Peanuts are a big deal. It's they're getting up to close to 20 million people, mostly rural. So there's a lot of peanut farmers out there. Average farm size or production size per year is about a hectare, a little bit less. Yields are around 800 kg. So I would say less than a metric ton. And just that math alone means that in your fairly large amount of production, you need a whole lot of seed because your yields are low, which means coordinating across a whole lot of people. And I would say that the seed sector, I'll talk about a bit more, is completely dominated by informal. So most people are just buying seed from a market. The interesting thing that makes this case particularly worth looking at, and why we looked at it, is that the tobacco industry, which is incredibly critical for the economy of Malawi, is in decline rapidly. But those companies that aggregate tobacco across smallholder producers are they want to stay in business, and so they are investing in diversification, and peanut is a big part of that. So there's a large amount of contract production happening with peanuts in there. So we've got sophisticated companies that are capitalized starting to invest in it, and we're learning a lot from that. The way the seed system works now, there's basically one public breeder who is both responsible for releasing varieties and importantly also producing all the breeder seed. And by the law, that all foundation seed has to come within one generation of foundation seed in Malawi. And basically, there's no clear system for how foundation seed is even produced. So those second generations to get it out to certified seed, it exists, but it's very disaggregated. ICRESAT has, I should say, also a large breeding program and a research station, and has worked on seeds. So that's kind of what's happened to get new varieties out for a while. The certified seed, again, with the political content, it's really, there's no quote unquote real market. That there's basically an input subsidy program. So the government's buying certified seed. There's not that many farmers actually just buying it, or there's kind of the donor market looking to buy it to give out to farmers. So there's limited, I would say, accountability. And what we see is very low germination rates of certified seed. Because we're not really sure where that certified seed in some cases is even coming from. And the government systems that manage it are chronically underfunded. Just as a note, certified seed has to be shelled in the country, which is funny because most of the farmers are small scale and want it all in shell to hand shell. And there's a big transition from the standard Virginia varieties to move towards Spanish varieties because they're targeting the South African market. So that transition has given us a lot of interesting tidbits about how this might work. And I think the most important thing to note about the seed system and how it works there is that there are a lot of very uncoordinated players. You've got the government, you've got lots of NGOs, the donor community, the innovation lab, for example, the research community, and then farmers groups and limited private sector. But as I say, with the sort of until now, we've got a growing, organized, formal sector that's coming into the picture as part of the early generation seed production and within the contract farming. And that's given us a lot of insight in how we could get scaling of new varieties and I would say a new model. So what have we learned? Again, every context is different, and I would say that seed systems work along a continuum of both formal and informal and public and private. And just to kind of note some of them, although I would say even within these things that I've noted, there are lots of other very different ways that the informal system is working. And I'm kind of thinking more about how those interact. But there's, in many places, Senegal in particular, where they have a long history of peanut production, and to some degree in other places, there's these parastatal companies that are intended to produce all of the certified seed. Within the NGO community and donor communities, there's a lot of approach that I call the small seed pack and kind of cross your fingers. Basically, you give out, say, 2-3 kgs of seed and hope that over time these varieties get taken up. As you can imagine, that means there's a lot of mixing of and lost gains, but it's very low input. The model that I've called the local seed business is probably the most critical kind of semi-formal version. These are, sometimes they're like co-ops, say like 30 farmers who are producing for the 300 farmers around them. It's based on the idea of not a certified seed produced, but what they're calling a QDS, quality declared seed, or in India, they call it a truthfully labeled seed. So there is a level of quality control. But I think the interesting piece is that the overhead cost of production, transport, all those things are managed because it's just locally done. There's no third party certification and accountability. It's more just, if you're selling to your neighbors, you're going to be accountable to your neighbors. And so that's a big way that good varieties could be put out. And India, the second largest producer of peanut in the world, this is a really important model. The next sort of semi-privatized integration is this Malawi model, where you've got highly organized companies in the private sector who are dealing with the early generation to deal with their own seed needs. And that's because they've created an internal market pull and a little bit of vertical integration. And what's interesting about that is that I think we can start to see some spillover effects. You've got, at least a model for getting good varieties out there and maintaining some quality where it can spill over to these informal markets or in existence parallel with, say, these local seed business models. In the US system, and I've talked to a lot of people here about this, is we have kind of this interesting public-private partnership, and the nature of peanuts being a large crop, but still a niche, especially when you think of the different market segments. We have a lot of public input into how it works, university breeding systems, but also that there is some vertical integration. So there's a lot of coordination within the system between the shelling companies, for example, who are the seed companies. I think that's something that gets misunderstood when we get outside of the context of say, the US. And then finally, we have more or less these, as I would understand it, very vertically integrated within the private company. So the breeder could be the same company that's making the value-added products. So quality control within that system is a little simpler. And like in the case of Argentina, you've got very, very large farms. So some conclusions. The hard part really is that success of the sustainability of these systems depends on how you set up the early generation seed. So like in Malawi, the breeder is responsible to grow breeder seed, but he is chronically underfunded, relies on donor funds, and he's producing seed very much like the smallholder farmers. So purity is a challenge. Volume is always a challenge with the multiplication rates. So we have to think about that. I heard this second point from many people, but basically nobody would get into peanut seed business unless they had to, meaning that unless you're in the business of producing or selling peanuts, you need all of that vertical integration for it to work, I think. And this is something that the development community, donor community needs to internalize, that we can't hold up the commercialization paradigm that's based on basically the hybrid maize system that has worked to a degree in Africa, with private seed companies and say storefront distribution. That's just not going to work for peanut, I don't think. Because formal seed systems are demand driven and they require to some degree vertical integration for all the reasons that make peanut a little bit different. So what do we do about these massive informal systems? I jokingly call, maybe we think about a fish hatchery model where, we subsidize and produce a large amount of high quality seed that looks, like something they grow already, but has the traits of interest. And we just try to flood the market over time to just improve the population within those seed. So there's a lot I've covered. There's a lot more to do. This is definitely a work in progress. So I'd like to acknowledge these are the folks that have given me quite a bit of time for interviews, and I hope to continue. If folks have questions or would like to talk to me about seed systems and things that I'm missing or ideas, this is, like I say, a work in progress, and I look forward to continuing gathering more information. And the ultimate point is to both get maybe a production giving some direction towards investments for USAID, but also, I think this hasn't been clearly documented very well so far.
Thanks, Jamie, for that very informative presentation. We're going to move on to our next speaker due to time, but thanks again for being involved with us today.
Yeah.